Mosaic, a daily news program from Link TV, presents a selection of news reports from independent and state-controlled broadcasters from throughout the Middle East.
An Iraqi group led by Abu Mus'ab al-Zarqawi killed 2 Iraqi intelligence officers and displayed the footage of the execution on the internet.
U.S.
airstrikes on Fallujah kill and wound dozens of people. Meanwhile, fighting erupted between the U.S. Marines and gunmen in the eastern parts of the city. A bus was caught in the crossfire, and civilians were killed by American gunfire. Fallujah General Hospital overflowed with the victims of a U.S. bombing. The U.S. forces dropped a 230-pound bomb, causing massive explosions in the Askari neighborhood in Fallujah and in the industrial zone in the west. As usual, the U.S. forces justified this attack, saying they were targeting hideouts used by Abu Mus'ab al-Zarqawi's group. According to the city's residents, the U.S. forces bombed a popular restaurant, killing 4 people. Gunmen in Ramadi released a videotape belonging to the Tawhid and Jihad group, led by al-Zarqawi. It shows an armed group bombing Iraqi government buildings. This operation followed U.S. air raids in mosques in Ramadi under the pretext that the mosques were used to harbor terrorists and store weapons. Al-Zarqawi's group sent a videotape to the Associated Press office in Baghdad claiming responsibility for the destruction of a U.S. military convoy in Mosul.
In the name of the God Almighty, we will resume our jihad everywhere where the aggressors are to be found.
Amidst the chaos and lack of security in Iraq, the U.S. forces are convinced that Abu Mus'ab al-Zarqawi is the prime suspect, responsible for the chain of violent attacks in Iraq since the collapse of Saddam Hussein's regime in April of 2003.
It is another dark day for childhood. Ghadir Mukhaymar, the 11-year-old Palestinian girl whom Israeli occupation soldiers shot at a UN school, died today of serious wounds. An UNRWA spokesman said the pace of children death in Gaza has been accelerating terribly in recent weeks. Meanwhile, Israel expanded its now massive 13-day-old aggression on the northern Gaza Strip, killing at least 3 Palestinians and injuring 7 others in the town of Beit Lahia.
Doctors helplessly tried to save the life of Ghadir Mukhaymar. She was an 11-year-old Palestinian girl who was shot by Israeli bullets in Khan Yunis. The occupation soldiers hit her in the chest when they fired towards a school in the refugee camp. UNRWA said Ghadir was inside her classroom in the school run by the international organization when she was shot. The agency said this incident is the 4th in less than 2 years. Just last month, a 10-year-old girl died after being shot at her desk in Khan Yunis. An UNRWA spokesman said that the latest death was horrific. He said schools should be havens of peace and that the pace of child deaths in Gaza has been accelerating terribly in recent weeks. The most basic right of the child to life is now being violated almost every day.
A school full of thousands of children. Why did they shoot her? Weren't those people who fired aware of the fact it was a school? Why would they shoot a school full of children?
No answer could be given to Ghadir's mother or the mother of Iman Hams, a 13-year-old girl who was shot dead 20 times as she passed an Israeli military outpost en route to school. The Israeli military suspended an officer under investigation for firing at her. The soldiers said the commander approached her and shot twice. He then came back and shot many times. The occupation army said the soldiers thought she was carrying a bomb, but then the occupation army acknowledged that she wasn't. F-16 fighter jets were still overhead after killing a member of Hamas armed wing early Wednesday. 25-year-old Muhammad Ma'ruf was killed in Beit Lahia town by an Israeli helicopter missile. The aerial attack injured at least 2 other people in this northern Gaza Strip town. Shortly after the raid, a column of Israeli tanks moved in. Armored bulldozers demolished several houses and flattened farmland in the town of about 30,000 residents. Occupation soldiers took up positions on several rooftops and dozens of people were trapped in their homes. 6 Palestinians were shot and injured by army gunfire, 1 seriously. 2 of the injured were teenagers. An Israeli commander said his troops had met significant resistance as they broadened their offensive to Beit Lahia to the north of Jabalia refugee camp, the focus of Operation Days of Penitence since its launch late last month. Hamas has insisted that it cannot be crushed by Israel and it will only stop firing Qassam rockets when Israeli occupation army stops all aggression on all Palestinian territories. A violent blast also shook Shati, a refugee camp just west of Gaza City along the coast. The cause of the blast was not immediately known, but witnesses figured it could have been caused by a tank shell. Meanwhile, a 28-year-old Palestinian man also died of his injuries, which he had sustained on Sunday during Israel's massive offensive in the northern Gaza Strip. A total of 114 Palestinians have now been killed by Israeli occupation forces in northern Gaza over the last 2 weeks.
Health NGO Médecins du Monde accused Israel of using heavy weapons against civilians and blocking aid from reaching the area. The French non-governmental organization said in a statement that there has been a considerable usage by the Israeli army of armed vehicles and planes. Missiles have frequently been used to target vehicles, buildings and people. Médecins du Monde said that most of the wounded suffered serious injury, which could lead to handicaps because of the frequent use by the army of heavy weapons such as missiles. The organization called humanitarian and medical access a major problem in the Gaza Strip. Israeli occupation army arrested a top military leader of Hamas movement in the West Bank town of Al-Khalil. The Israeli occupation holds Imad Qawasmi, 32 years old, responsible for masterminding double bombings in the town of Beersheba in August. Witnesses said troops surrounded and partially destroyed the house in which Qawasmi had been staying. Palestinian security sources said 3 of his brothers were arrested by the occupation army several months ago.
Prime Minister Ariel Sharon does not intend to make any changes to his coalition ahead of the October 25th Knesset vote on the disengagement plan. Sources close to the Prime Minister say that the current talks with the ultra-Orthodox parties are intended to secure a majority for the disengagement plan. More from IBA's Knesset correspondent Dan Diker.
The crisis in the Likud showed no real signs of cooling off today. Last night's meeting between Prime Minister Ariel Sharon and 24 Likud MKs, only those who voted in favor of his Monday night State of the Union address, underscored the real possibility, according to political observers, of an irreversible split in the ruling party. Sharon said late last night he would punish party rebels who voted against his Monday night speech. Sources close to Sharon said he would take a forceful step to prove who was boss. Deputy Prime Minister Ehud Olmert said today that it is time for the Prime Minister to put some order into the Likud. Olmert joined fellow Likud ministers Limor Livnat and Tzipi Livni's calls to broaden the coalition, which Sharon said was now at the top of his agenda. Meanwhile, for their part, Likud rebel MKs expressed confidence today that up to 20 Likud lawmakers, that's half the faction, will abstain or oppose the Gaza withdrawal plan in the October 25th Knesset vote. They say their pressure on Sharon increases the chance that the Prime Minister will end up agreeing to a national referendum on Gaza, despite his refusal again today. But the entire Likud faction did maintain party discipline today, voting down bills brought to the floor by the opposition. Meanwhile, Labor Chairman Shimon Peres said today he prefers staying out of a government as confused as this one, even if it is moving towards peace. Dan Diker, IBA News.
The 4 terrorists who carried out last week's deadly Sinai attacks fled the scene just before the bombs went off and are now being hunted by Egyptian security forces. This according to the Egyptian Al-Aram newspaper. In a report published today, the paper cited security sources as saying that the 2 people who drove the vehicle to the Hilton Taba Hotel managed to escape right before the explosion. The other 2 suspects in the Ras al-Satan bombing left their vehicles and ran away. The article contradicts earlier assumptions that suicide bombers carried out the deadly attacks. Egyptian investigators believe the vehicles came from inside Egypt and that evidence points to the involvement of Osama bin Laden's Al-Qaeda terror network in the attack.
U.S. Secretary of State Colin Powell stepped up the pressure on Syria and Lebanon amid crucial UN meetings to determine how the Security Council will handle a report by Secretary General Kofi Annan on compliance by Beirut and Damascus with the resolution calling for Syrian troops to leave Lebanon and for Hezbollah to disarm. Powell insisted Hezbollah immediately disarm and Syrian troops withdraw. Zarqawi has a story.
Colin Powell told the U.S. government-funded Al-Hurra television the time has come for the Lebanese to decide their own future without the presence of Syrian forces who are administered from Damascus. He warned Syria against hosting Palestinian movements and reiterated concerns over the Syrian-Iraqi border. The Secretary of State admitted that the U.S. and Syria held positive discussions in the past few weeks on the Iraq border and on scrutinizing financial transactions, but made clear the U.S. wants to see action. The other co-sponsor of Security Council Resolution 1559, Paris, said the consultations on drafting a presidential statement that backs UN Secretary General Kofi Annan's recent report, which declared Beirut and Damascus in breach of the resolution, are making headway, especially on having Annan provide a regular report on compliance with 1559. If this does not materialize, diplomatic sources said, France would seek drafting a new resolution. Algeria, backed by Pakistan, refused to agree to any statement that mentioned Syria by name, effectively blocking agreement because any statement requires the approval of all 15 Council members. A statement would support the sovereignty and independence of Lebanon and call for the full implementation of Resolution 1559. In Syria, the editor-in-chief of state-run El Thawra newspaper told the United Press International Damascus believed that there were a lot of French interests in Syria and stressed it was not in Paris's interest to push forward the UN resolution. He said that there were unannounced goals and purposes behind 1559, adding it had nothing to do with Lebanese presidential election. President Bashar al-Assad had vowed to maintain close ties with Beirut despite UN pressure. He slammed the resolution as a mistake and said Syria had no intentions to dominate Lebanon.
In the latest violence in Iraq, at least 5 U.S. soldiers were killed and several others wounded in 2 separate attacks. A suicide car bomber blew up his vehicle next to a U.S. military convoy in the northern Iraqi city of Mosul, killing 2 U.S. soldiers. 27 others, including 5 U.S. soldiers, have also been wounded in the attack, which damaged a Humvee vehicle. A U.S. military spokesman described the assault as a complex attack and said there had been an exchange of gunfire after the blast. 3 other U.S. soldiers have also been killed last night when a bomb went off while their vehicle was passing nearby east of the capital, Baghdad. In Ramadi, medical sources said that 6 people have been killed and 33 others wounded during clashes with U.S. forces in Ramadi overnight. Meanwhile, fighting in Fallujah killed 5 civilians and wounded 5 others last night. U.S. tanks fired at the eastern entrance of the city hours after an airstrike that flattened a popular restaurant in the city. Residents said U.S. forces opened fire on the cars driving just outside Fallujah, killing many civilians. Iraq's interim prime minister warned the Fallujah it must hand over foreign militants or face a major operation to root them out. Iyad Allawi's comments set a tough condition for negotiators seeking to defuse a months-long standoff between U.S. forces and people in Iraq's most rebellious city. Meanwhile, gunmen from Shiite militia continue to trickle into police stations at Baghdad's slum of Sadr city to hand over their weapons in a process seen by the U.S. military as unsatisfactory. But it was unclear how many weapons have been taken off the streets by the buyback deal with Mahdi Army, which began on Monday and will run for 5 days. An Iraqi group led by suspected Al-Qaeda ally Abu Mus'ab al-Zarqawi has beheaded 2 Iraqi intelligence officers and posted a video of the killings on the internet. The video from the Tawheed and Jihad group showed a close-up of the 2 men's identification cards, which said they were Iraqi intelligence officers. The 2 men said in the video they were captured on September 28th in Baghdad's Haifa Street and admitted to working for Iraqi intelligence. Meanwhile, Beirut's foreign ministry said Iraqi kidnappers have freed 2 Lebanese men who were taken hostage west of Baghdad last month. The 2 men, Sharb al-Karam al-Hajj and Aram Nalbandian, disappeared on September 18th along with the Iraqi driver. Nalbandian said that after the kidnappers found out that he and his colleague were not working with Americans, they were released. Meanwhile, an American photographer abducted by gunmen in Baghdad on Sunday was also freed. The chief executive of the World Picture News Agency said in a statement in New York that 24-year-old Paul Taggart is safe and has spoken by telephone with his parents in Tulsa, Oklahoma. British Prime Minister Tony Blair refused to apologize for misrepresenting the case for war on Iraq. Blair angrily rejected an accusation by the opposition party leader Michael Howard that he did not accurately report the intelligence on Saddam Hussein's weapons of mass destruction and asked him to apologize. Blair and Howard's tug-of-war came during the first Prime Minister's questions since members of Parliament returned from their summit break. Howard said that while the intelligence reports had said little was known about Iraq's weapons and biological capabilities since late 1998, Blair had claimed the intelligence had shown beyond doubt that Iraq was continuing to produce chemical and biological weapons. Blair said that the Tory leader, having supported the war, was now trying to capitalize on anti-war sentiment in an attempt to give himself credibility.
Will the Prime Minister realise that before he can move on, there is one matter that he must deal with? The Prime Minister did not accurately report the intelligence he received to the country. Will he now say sorry for that?
Mr. Speaker, I have made it abundantly clear and do so again. At the time of the Butler report that I take full responsibility and indeed apologise for any information given in good faith that has subsequently turned out to be wrong. That is entirely proper. I've already done so. What I do not in any way accept is that there was any deception of anyone. That is what has been looked into by 4 separate independent inquiries, and in each case that allegation has been found to be wrong. And I will not apologise for removing Saddam Hussein. I will not apologise for the conflict.
The European Union welcomed the Libyan President Colonel Muammar Gaddafi's regime back into the international community, especially since his commitment to end his weapons of mass destruction program under international supervision. This was made in a statement by the European Union during a foreign ministers' meeting in Luxembourg, lifting the arms sanctions on Libya after 18 years. The initial approval to lift the sanctions comes after Italy pressured the Union to do so, because it wanted to sell Tripoli naval military equipment that can be used to monitor illegal immigration. This explains why Italy requested a strengthening of European relations with Libya, which was previously isolated internationally.
Libya has been freed from its international prison by the European Union with American blessing. But the lifting of the arms sale ban imposed on Libya since 1986 did not come without a price, since Libya paid billions of dollars in compensation to the victims of Pan Am, the American airliner, Yotel, the French airliner, and Melhabel in Germany. It also agreed to end its weapons of mass destruction program.
Very good day.
This is a very good day, not just for the European and Libya, but for the security and peace in the world. It is a result of direct diplomatic efforts by the United States and Britain. We convinced Libya to end its weapons of mass destruction program. We convinced it to do so peacefully, and in turn, we lifted the sanctions against selling arms to it.
Libya was not the only country that wanted to be released from its isolation, but Italy too applied pressure to lift the arms sanctions on it. Just days ago, Italy and Tripoli began a project to build a pipeline under the Mediterranean Sea, costing billions of dollars to transport natural gas from Libya. It reached to the point that Italy threatened to lift the sanction on its own, without its European partners, because it also wanted to provide Tripoli with military equipment to strengthen the monitoring of Libya's coasts, and to work on preventing illegal immigrants from infiltrating into the Lampedusa island. The joint statement by the European foreign ministers revived Colonel Muammar Gaddafi's regime, which for several years was considered isolated and unacceptable. They expressed their major concern over the fate of 5 Bulgarian nurses and a Palestinian doctor who were sentenced to death, charged with infecting hundreds of children with the AIDS virus in the Bibi Ghazi hospital. This issue is one of the latest obstacles that prevented full diplomatic relations between the European Union and Gaddafi. The European Union did not want this to become an obstacle. Still, there are reports that indicate that they will pressure Tripoli to free the Bulgarian nurses as they prepare to send assistance to those who have acquired the AIDS virus. Libya implemented all that was asked of it, as stated by the British Foreign Secretary. With these events, Libya received blessings from America and Europe, a blessing that was needed to bring this obsolete regime out of isolation.
Britain officials from opposing parties criticized British Prime Minister Tony Blair as a result of last week's Iraq Survey Group report, now commonly called the Balfour Report. The report shows that Saddam Hussein has destroyed all his weapons of mass destruction more than 10 years ago. The head of the opposition Conservative Party accused Blair of not telling the truth concerning intelligence reports he had received on weapons of mass destruction.
عاد العراق مرة أخرى ليسيطر بقوة على ساحة العمل.
Once again, Iraq is dominating the international politics in Britain in the wake of the Iraqi Survey Group report, which confirmed that this Arab country did not possess chemical, biological, or nuclear weapons in 2003. Iraq did not pose a threat, and thus launching the war, toppling Saddam's regime, and killing and injuring tens of thousands of innocent civilians was not justified.
عشرات الآلاف من المدنيين الأبرياء من أبنائه. جاء تقرير لجنة مسح العراق ليوفر.
The Iraqi Survey Group report is now providing the fuel to the British anti-war movement, which rallied millions of demonstrators before and during the major military operations in Iraq. However, the British Prime Minister, who is being hunted by the Iraqi curse during his African tour, was able to find a solution for this political problem.
ما يوضحه التقرير هو أن القضية معقدة.
The report shows the matter is complicated. Like I'm now supposed to believe that there were no weapons in Iraq that were ready to be used. I also hope that others can be honest and accept the fact that the sanctions were not effective. To the contrary, Saddam Hussein was going around them. He actually had the intention of resuming the production and development of weapons of mass destruction.
وكانت لديه نية بالفعل لإعادة إنتاج وتطوير برامج لأسلحة الدمار الشامل.
These intentions that Blair is talking about were interpreted differently by the anti-war movement, even by officials within the British Labour Party. Jeremy Corbyn, Labour Party Parliament member and a member of the House of Commons, representing Islington District, western of London.
We can't hold any country accountable on the basis of their intentions. For example, some people confirm that many in the American administration had the intention of attacking Cuba, but that does not give Cuba the right to attack the U.S. Intentions must be supported by evidence on the ground. In the case of Iraq, this was madness.
Furthermore, the final Iraqi Survey Group report was criticized by others, like Labour Party and Lord Member Nizar Ahmed.
What I hear from the survey
group is that the reason they concluded that Saddam Hussein had intentions to produce and develop weapons of mass destruction is based on the fact that he did not kill the scientists that developed these weapons, even after he got rid of the weapons in the mid-1990s. It is a sad day for people to be demanding that.
Invading countries and nations cannot be justified on the basis of their intentions. Previously, Tony Blair has proven that he's able to counter and contain internal political opposition. But now, the anti-war movement intends to rally millions of people to street demonstrations to demand him to withdraw the British forces from Iraq.
Next week, Parliament resumes.
Next week, when Parliament returns from recess, strong inquiries will be submitted to Blair concerning Iraq. The following week, thousands of Europeans and British will attend the Social European Conference, which is expected to condemn the war. In November, a huge anti-war demonstration will be organized to demand that the government withdraw their occupying forces from Iraq.
Their occupying forces.
جبهة معارضة الحرب في بريطانيا أكدت أنها نظمت صفوفها مجددا لتحركات.
The British anti-war movement has regrouped itself, and it seems that this time it will be able to maneuver in a way that will affect Tony Blair's future, especially if George Bush loses the American elections.
أحمد حسن الشرقاوي، قناة النيل للأخبار، لندن.
Pakistan has announced that it has successfully tested a new medium-range Ghori missile system. However, Islamabad confirms that this test, which is the fourth of its kind, has no political implications. Rather, it's for research purposes.
Pakistan is trying to build a deterrent military arsenal, while the country is subjected to internal and international pressures over the war on terrorism and the ongoing conflict in Kashmir with its neighbor India. A series of tests on middle and long-range missiles capable of carrying nuclear warheads, Islamabad conducted the fourth test of medium-range missiles. A spokesman from the Public Relations Office of the Pakistani military forces announced that they have successfully tested the locally manufactured Ghori missile. He also said that the success of this test proves that the Ghori missile system has reached high technological and scientific levels. In an attempt to decrease India's fears, the Pakistani President Pervez Musharraf reiterated that this test is not intended to send a political message to New Delhi. Rather, these tests are designed to ensure the readiness of the missile systems and their effectiveness and precision. Islamabad has already conducted two tests with the Ghori missiles, one on the 29th of September and another on the 4th of July. In addition, on the 9th of March, Pakistan tested the ballistic Shahan 2 missile system, which has a range of 2,000 kilometers. Since 1998, both Pakistan and India have been conducting such tests with the objective of developing their missile arsenals. While relations between Islamabad and New Delhi have been improving, the question that presents itself: will this weapons race, which has been increasing one year after the other, eventually help in resolving the Kashmir conflict peacefully? There seems to be an international understanding that the weapon race is designed to create a balance between the two nuclear neighbors in the Indian subcontinent.
The views expressed on Mosaic are not those of Link TV or its sponsors, but of the broadcasters themselves. Mosaic is made possible by a grant from the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, which promotes journalism excellence worldwide and invests in the vitality of 26 U.S. communities, and the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation. Additional support is provided by the Firedoll Foundation and Henry and Virgilia Dakin.